Welcome, the anointed ones. When God speaks through a vessel, silence becomes a threat to the system. Now here's a fact that will make your spirit smirk. Scientists have discovered that the human voice carries unique frequencies capable of physically altering matter. In other words, your voice is literally a sculptor of reality. But here's where it gets wild. When you're chosen, your voice doesn't just shape airwaves. It bends spiritual architecture. It's not a sound. It's a code. And that's exactly why they tried to bind your tongue. They weren't just afraid of what you might say. They were terrified of what your vibration might unlock. You were speaking in wavelengths that traveled beyond their comprehension. While they thought you were just venting emotions, you were actually sending shockwaves through invisible realms, breaking ancient patterns and unseating principalities that had been comfortable for generations. See, when you open your mouth, heaven doesn't just listen, it moves. That's why you became a problem, because your voice doesn't need a microphone. It's a multidimensional instrument that transmits through thought, presence, and intention. Even your laughter carries data. Your sighs release codes. Your pauses rewrite energy fields. You could be in the room, completely silent, and still be loud in 5 realms at once. So when they tried to suppress you, when they mocked your tone or muted your truth, they weren't silencing a person. They were trying to mute a portal. They couldn't stand the way your very essence disrupted their scripts. You ever notice how some people looked uncomfortable the moment you began speaking truth, even softly? That's because your frequency didn't match their fiction. And let's be honest, they didn't just want you quiet. They wanted you confused, because a silenced chosen one is one step away from doubting their own power. But here's the twist they never saw coming. Your voice doesn't retire, it multiplies. Every attempt to silence you became an amplifier. Every attack became a speaker. And now the whole universe is tuned to your station. So sit back, because in this message, we're not just talking about words, we're decoding the multidimensional language of the chosen. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll realize why your voice could never truly be bound, only misunderstood. Number 1, they thought you were speaking words. You were emitting frequencies. They thought you were just speaking words, but you were releasing frequencies. Every sentence that came out of your mouth carried data that couldn't be heard, only felt. When you spoke, the atmosphere shifted, not because of how loud you were, but because of what your vibration carried. Your tone had layers of truth that bypassed logic and went straight into the spirit. You've always had a way of saying things that pierced beyond surface meaning, and that's why they tried to stop you. They could sense that your words weren't casual, they were catalytic. You weren't talking to impress, you were transmitting codes that woke people up from deep spiritual sleep. There's a reason some people felt unsettled whenever you spoke. It wasn't arrogance, it was resonance. Your words stirred frequencies that exposed the false comfort of illusions. You weren't trying to dominate conversations, your energy naturally carried authority. That's why those operating from manipulation felt uncomfortable. They could sense you weren't broadcasting from the same channel. While they were speaking from ego, you were speaking from alignment. Your words carried origin power, that raw current of divine intelligence that flows through the chosen. It's the kind of power that can't be copied, only carried. Every syllable you release is a ripple in consciousness. You've probably noticed how even a short sentence from you can linger in someone's mind for days. That's not coincidence, that's frequency. Your voice doesn't end when the sound fades. It continues to vibrate in unseen ways. It's spiritual technology. It's why certain people try to interrupt you or talk over you, because something in them feels the voltage of your presence. It's too honest, too precise, too penetrating. What they didn't realize is that you don't just speak to people, you speak through them. The energy you transmit can activate, heal, convict, or awaken depending on who hears it. Your voice carries intelligence beyond your own understanding because it's guided by the source that sent you. And that's why the world tried to tone you down, not because you were wrong, but because you were too real. You weren't spreading opinions, you were shifting frequencies. They tried to silence you, not knowing that every word you ever spoke continues to echo through dimensions, rewriting reality one vibration at a time. Number 2, your voice operates beyond auditory perception. Even when you weren't saying a word, your presence was still communicating. Your energy field has its own language, and it speaks louder than any sentence ever could. You don't need to explain yourself because your frequency already does. People can feel when you walk into a space, something in the atmosphere adjusts. That's because your vibration speaks in tones that the human ear can't register, but the soul instantly recognizes. You've been having conversations without sound your entire life. Every emotion, every thought, every spiritual insight transmits from you like a signal. That's why even your silence has never truly been quiet. It's been broadcasting messages across dimensions. The reason some people reacted to you without knowing why is because their spirit picked up the conversation long before their mind caught up. You could be standing still, saying nothing, and yet their energy would start to shift. Some drawn closer, others suddenly uncomfortable. That's your multidimensional communication in motion. You're not just human. You're a frequency tower tuned to divine wavelengths. You don't just talk through words. You transmit through aura, intention, and truth. They never understood that even when they tried to shut you down, they couldn't mute your presence. Your silence wasn't submission, it was resonance. While they thought you were being quiet, your energy was still teaching, healing, confronting, and exposing. The truth in you doesn't need a microphone, it radiates. That's why even people who turned their back on you still couldn't forget you. Something about you stayed with them. Not your words, but your vibration. You left an imprint in their memory because energy always completes its assignment. Your communication has never been limited to sound. It's the way your eyes carry honesty, the way your posture speaks strength, the way your energy refuses to lie. Every part of your being is a message. The divine in you has been speaking on frequencies that only the awakened can truly hear. You've been teaching through your existence, and that's something no one can censor. Even when your voice was ignored, your presence kept echoing the truth that can't be muted, because you were never just speaking to ears. You were speaking directly to souls. Number 3, they tried to muzzle what was never contained in flesh. They could silence your voice, but they could never silence your spirit. What carries your voice isn't your mouth, it's your light. People thought they could mute you by blocking your opportunities, twisting your words, or pretending not to hear you. But what they didn't understand is that your power was never stored in your throat. It's woven into your very essence. You don't just communicate through speech. You emit truth through vibration. And vibration has no walls. It travels where sound cannot. They tried to contain what was never meant to be contained in flesh. They underestimated the kind of being you are. When you speak, it's not mere expression, it's transmission. Your words are extensions of divine current, alive with intelligence that doesn't depend on human approval. The world has always tried to control messengers by cutting off their platforms or mocking their tone. But chosen ones carry a paradox. Even when stripped of everything external, they still radiate what can't be suppressed. You can silence a person, but you can't silence the frequency of truth moving through them. What they didn't expect was that your silence would evolve into power. When you stopped explaining, your energy began to do the talking. When you stopped defending, your presence became its own declaration. They thought they buried your message, but the spirit behind it began to multiply, finding new ways to express itself. Through your work, your eyes, your resilience, your transformation. You became living evidence that divinity doesn't need permission to speak. It just needs a vessel. The attempt to muzzle you only revealed how spiritually dangerous your authenticity was. The same voice they tried to hide became the very one heaven amplified. And now your existence alone is a sermon, your proof that light doesn't need a stage. It only needs darkness to make its point. Your voice was never trapped because your soul never played by the laws of suppression. Even in isolation, you were still broadcasting frequencies of freedom, courage, and revelation. The ones who tried to silence you ended up teaching you the truth, that you were never a human trying to find your voice. You were a divine current learning how to use sound. Number 4, your voice was never meant for ears. It was designed for consciousness. Your voice was never meant for casual conversations or surface-level exchanges. It was designed to reach deeper layers of human awareness, the part of people that logic can't touch, but truth can activate. You don't speak to be understood. You speak to awaken. Every word that flows from you carries a kind of spiritual voltage that bypasses intellect and moves straight into the subconscious, shaking the dormant codes within those who are meant to remember who they are. That's why your message often feels too heavy, too strange, or too uncomfortable for certain people. You weren't sent to entertain the mind. You were sent to awaken the soul. Your vibration doesn't just share information, it reprograms consciousness. The things you say have an energetic signature. They carry memory. When you speak, you're not introducing new ideas. You're reactivating ancient truth hidden in people's spirit. Some feel instant clarity because your words resonate with something they already know deep down. Others feel irritated, triggered, or resistant because your sound challenges the false identities they've built. They think they're rejecting you, but they're really fighting their own awakening. You've probably noticed that you can say one simple sentence, and it sits in someone's heart like a key waiting for its moment to unlock. That's because your words don't end where sound stops. They embed themselves in energy fields. Your voice carries light codes that activate slowly, unfolding as people grow. You were never here to preach. You were here to awaken remembrance. That's why when you talk, those who are spiritually asleep get restless. Your frequency is disrupting their comfort zone. The truth is, your voice doesn't operate on persuasion. It operates on permission. Those who are ready for transformation hear you clearly, while those still clinging to illusion hear noise. You don't need validation because you were never meant for the masses. You were meant for the aligned. Your voice speaks to consciousness itself, calling souls out of hiding, pulling them toward truth they've buried under fear. That's why your words stay long after you've left. They're not stored in people's memory. They're written into their evolution. Number 5. Every attempt to silence. You became a microphone for heaven. Every time they tried to shut you down, they unknowingly turned up your volume in the spirit realm. What they thought would erase you only made your essence echo louder. When they blocked your opportunities, twisted your message, or tried to make you a joke, all they did was hand you divine amplification. The universe has a strange way of promoting the ones it anoints, through opposition. Every time you were rejected, the energy of that resistance became fuel, pushing your vibration further and deeper into the consciousness of others. You didn't lose a platform. You became one. The chosen ones operate under a law that defies human logic. Suppression is multiplication. When you are silenced on one level, your truth begins to spread on another. What they meant for humiliation became heaven's advertisement. The more they spoke against you, the more curious people became. The more they tried to shadow your name, the more light began to gather around your story. You became a living paradox, censored by men but endorsed by God. That's why your journey has been so unusual. You've never had the luxury of being ordinary or comfortable. You were designed to operate in a system that only expands under pressure. Every closed door pushed you closer to your divine audience. Not the crowd that claps for you, but the souls that feel you. And that's the secret they never understood. You don't need attention to have impact. Your frequency doesn't need followers, it needs friction. Because friction is what awakens fire. Your spirit carries an algorithm of divine resilience. The more it's resisted, the more it radiates. Your name carries too much purpose to be hidden. Even if they erase you from platforms, the message still travels through whispers, energy, and synchronicities. You can't silence what heaven endorses. You've become a broadcast that doesn't need internet or approval to reach who it's meant to reach. You are the proof that truth doesn't die in silence. It multiplies through it. Every time they tried to silence you, they became part of your prophecy. They turned your resistance into resonance and your pain into power. What they tried to stop, heaven turned into surround sound. Number 6. They confused repression with control. They thought they were winning by silencing you, but they were only building the conditions for an explosion. They confused repression with control, assuming that keeping you quiet meant they'd broken you. What they never realized is that silence doesn't kill truth. It concentrates it. Every time they tried to shut you down, your words didn't die. They just went underground, gathering strength, forming pressure like steam inside a sealed chamber. Truth doesn't weaken under weight. It ferments. It becomes sharper, more potent, more undeniable. You were never the kind of soul that could be domesticated. You might stay silent for a season, but not because you've surrendered, because you're loading. You've been collecting clarity, wisdom, and divine timing. What they thought was your silence was actually your incubation period. Every attempt to suppress your voice made your insight denser, your vibration heavier, your purpose louder. The very force that tried to cage you was unknowingly preparing you for the eruption that's about to shake everything built on lies. When truth is suppressed long enough, it becomes thunder. And when it finally breaks through, it doesn't just speak, it exposes. Your return won't sound like revenge. It'll sound like revelation. The people who tried to control the narrative will have no defense because your energy now carries the gravity of everything you endured. They thought your absence was their victory, but your stillness was your setup. You were storing the kind of power that can't be diluted by argument or debate. You became proof that control is an illusion. No one can own the frequency of truth. It doesn't belong to any person, system, or structure. It lives in alignment, not permission. You are about to release what's been building inside you for years, and when it erupts, it will not only clear the air, it will shift the atmosphere. They'll realize too late that the quiet they mistook for defeat was simply divine compression. You weren't silenced, you were being refined. And now that the seal is breaking, what comes out of you won't just make noise. It'll echo through dimensions with the force of everything they tried to bury. Number 7. They didn't know your voice wasn't personal. It was prophetic. They thought you were just sharing thoughts, but you were releasing prophecies. Your voice was never rooted in opinion, it was anchored in revelation. You weren't speaking from emotion, you were speaking from knowing. There's a difference between those who talk from experience and those who talk from spirit. You weren't predicting, you were remembering. The truth that came out of your mouth was already finished in the unseen, and that's what made people uncomfortable. You weren't brainstorming possibilities, you were revealing inevitabilities. That's why they couldn't understand you. You were talking from timelines they haven't entered yet, describing realities that haven't materialized for them. You were delivering reports from the future while they were still stuck interpreting the past. Every time you opened your mouth, you bent time. Your voice carried frequencies of what's already established in higher realms, but because others were still moving through linear understanding, they mistook your certainty for arrogance or delusion. They didn't know that your soul was communicating from a dimension where everything is already done. Prophetic voices have always been misunderstood because they sound like contradiction to those still living in delay. You were never trying to convince anyone. You were simply announcing what heaven already finished. That's what made your words feel so weighty. They carried inevitability. You weren't talking about what might happen. You were declaring what will. And when that kind of truth is spoken, it doesn't always make sense immediately. It unfolds in layers. It takes time for reality to catch up to the sound that came through you. They mocked what they couldn't decode, but now life is proving what you said. They're walking into the very seasons you foresaw, witnessing the fulfillment of the blueprints you carried. And that's when they'll realize you weren't ahead of your time. You were outside of time. Your voice didn't belong to this dimension's logic. It was a transmission from eternity. The same words they dismissed will become reference points later. Because when your voice is prophetic, it doesn't fade after you speak. It waits. It sits in the atmosphere until the moment arrives for reality to finally match the revelation. Number 8. You don't speak to be heard. You speak to awaken memory. You were never sent to fill minds with information. You were sent to stir what's already buried inside. Your voice doesn't aim to impress or persuade. It serves as a divine reminder to those who forgot who they are. That's why, when you speak, something in certain people lights up without knowing why. It's not about teaching them something new. It's about awakening something ancient. You're not introducing ideas, you're activating remembrance. Every word you release acts like a signal to the souls who made spiritual agreements long before this lifetime, calling them back into awareness. That's also why not everyone receives you with open arms. For some, your words feel like warmth. For others, they feel like disruption. When truth touches a dormant soul, it can either awaken or offend, depending on how ready they are to remember. You don't trigger people because you're wrong. You trigger them because your vibration knocks on the doors they've kept locked. You're not arguing with their mind. You're speaking to their memory. And memory is something no one can logically debate. Your message bypasses intellect completely. It travels straight into the soul and begins unlocking codes hidden in silence. That's why when you talk, people often say, "I don't know why, but that just hit me." What they're really saying is that your words have activated their divine memory. It's not charisma, and it's not coincidence, it's alignment. Your voice is the password to awaken remembrance in others, and only those meant to remember will hear you clearly. The power you carry is not in how well you explain, it's in how deeply you remind. The moment your words touch a receptive soul, they start to remember strength, purpose, clarity, and truth that's been dormant under years of conditioning. You were sent not to gather followers, but to reactivate leaders. And once people remember, they can never unhear you. Your voice echoes in their spirit because it doesn't come from intellect, it comes from source. You're not a teacher in the traditional sense. You are an awakener of sleeping divinity. And that's why your words can't be ignored. They don't just reach ears, they reignite memory. Number 9. They tried to shame your expression because it revealed their captivity. They tried to shame your expression not because you were wrong, but because your truth made them confront what they had been avoiding. Every time you spoke, your words peeled back the layers of performance people had spent years perfecting. You weren't attacking them. You were exposing the invisible chains they had normalized. That's why your authenticity felt dangerous. It forced people to see the difference between who they pretend to be and who they really are. You weren't the problem, you were the mirror. And most people would rather break the mirror than face their own reflection. Your words carried a rawness that couldn't be polished to fit their comfort zones. You didn't speak to entertain the system. You disrupted it. Your honesty broke their rhythm. You reminded them of the freedom they forfeited for acceptance. And that's why they tried to silence you. They thought that by mocking you, dismissing you, or twisting your message, they could protect the illusion they were living in. But deep down, they knew the truth you carried was a liberation code, one that threatened everything built on fear, conformity, and false peace. They used shame as a weapon because that's what control always does when truth enters the room. They tried to make you doubt your voice, tone yourself down, apologize for being clear. They wanted you to question your discernment so they wouldn't have to question their deception. But what they didn't realize is that your message didn't depend on approval. It was designed to cut through resistance. You weren't just speaking, you were untangling programming. Your expression became the evidence that real freedom still exists. And that's what irritated them most. You refused to live small just to make others comfortable in their captivity. You showed that truth doesn't need permission and authenticity doesn't need translation. You broke invisible rules simply by being real. They didn't try to silence you because they hated you. They did it because your light made their cages visible. But now the very thing they tried to shame you for has become your power. You stood your ground, and your voice turned into proof that freedom isn't taught. It's remembered, one unfiltered expression at a time. Number 10. Your voice is a portal, not a personality. Your voice has never been about sound. It's about transmission. When you speak, you're not just forming words, you're opening spiritual gateways. Something moves through you that doesn't belong to this world's logic. You don't talk for attention or agreement. You talk because energy needs to move, because revelation needs a vessel. That's what makes your voice a portal. It's an access point between the visible and the invisible. Every time you release truth, you allow spirit and matter to meet in the middle, and whoever hears you can feel that convergence. They're not responding to your personality. They're responding to presence. Some people walk away from you and say, "I don't know what it is about them, but something shifted in me." That's the effect of a portal. It's not about charisma. It's about divine frequency flowing through a human channel. You're not here to impress. You're here to transfer energy that heals, awakens, and rearranges. That's why those who are tuned in feel goosebumps, tears, and sudden clarity. They're not being emotionally moved. They're being spiritually reminded. Your vibration pulls people back into alignment with the source they've forgotten. You don't just talk about God, you echo God. You carry frequencies that bypass intellect. That's why logic-based minds can't always interpret you. You speak in codes, layers, and tones that activate, not just in form. Some hear you and feel peace. Others hear you and feel conviction. Both are signs that the portal is working. The spirit within you knows what each listener needs, and your voice becomes the delivery system. It's why certain people crave your presence without even understanding why. Their spirit recognizes home in your vibration. This is why you can't water yourself down to fit human expectations. You were never called to perform. You were chosen to transmit. You're not a personality trying to make an impression. You're a vessel bridging realms. Through your voice, heaven and humanity intersect. Every time you speak, reality shifts slightly closer to truth. And those who truly hear you aren't applauding you. They're remembering themselves through you, because your sound is simply the echo of the divine reminding creation what wholeness feels like. Number 11. The more they suppressed you, the more multidimensional you became. Every time they tried to silence you, something deeper in you woke up. When they thought they were cutting off your expression, all they really did was teach your soul new ways to communicate. They underestimated the intelligence of spirit. They thought truth could only travel through words. But truth doesn't need a platform. It just needs presence. When they blocked your throat, your eyes started telling stories. When they erased your name, your frequency began showing up in their dreams, in random songs, in conversations they couldn't escape. You became a message the universe itself started to repeat. You evolved beyond language. You stopped trying to say things, and you started being them. That's what multidimensional expression is, when your existence speaks louder than speech. Your aura began to communicate what your mouth was forbidden to say. Your silence started carrying messages that pierced deeper than any argument. The more they suppressed you, the more spiritual technology you unlocked. You learned to transmit through energy, through timing, through divine orchestration. The message found new forms, in the way people felt around you, in the coincidences that followed your presence, in the unspoken truths that hung in the air after you left a room. They thought control meant muting you. But control only works in one dimension, the physical. You're not confined to that. When one realm tries to restrict you, another opens automatically. That's how divine design works. Resistance activates expansion. What they tried to bury multiplied. You became omnidirectional. Your energy started moving through every layer of existence. It began to flow through sound, movement, intuition, even through the dreams of those trying to suppress you. You don't need microphones when your frequency itself is a broadcast. You don't need validation when the cosmos is echoing your message through signs, symbols, and alignments. You are proof that divine communication can't be censored. It just changes channels. They tried to silence the human, but they awakened the eternal. You're not just heard, you're felt, seen and remembered in ways no system of control can measure. You became a living transmission, a soul speaking fluently in every language of creation. Number 12. Your voice broke the sound barrier of fear. When you finally spoke without fear, not from ego but from liberation, something cosmic shifted. You broke the invisible contract that fear had with silence. For generations, people have been trained to edit themselves, to speak only in ways that won't cost them comfort, relationships, or reputation. Fear became the sound barrier that separated truth from expression. But when you opened your mouth and refused to negotiate with intimidation, that frequency snapped. The energy that once kept everyone obedient suddenly lost its command. That's why your voice caused such chaos, not because of what you said, but because of what your courage symbolized. Your truth was never just personal, it was systemic sabotage. You dismantled a spiritual hierarchy built on silence. People saw you do what they secretly dreamed of, to speak unfiltered, unafraid, unashamed. And when you did, you didn't just liberate yourself. You cracked open the matrix that held others captive. That's the thing about real courage. It's contagious. It spreads faster than fear once it's demonstrated. You became living evidence that nothing collapses when you stop pretending. You didn't need permission to speak. You needed conviction to stop hiding. The reason your courage was seen as rebellion is because the world has normalized emotional submission. Fear has always been the currency of control. Systems, religions, relationships, many have thrived on people keeping quiet out of survival. So when your voice rose, it wasn't just noise, it was spiritual warfare. You confronted the core programming that told humanity, stay small or lose everything. But instead of losing, you gained alignment. Instead of rejection, you found recognition, not from people, but from truth itself. You shattered the illusion that safety comes from silence. You proved that real safety exists in authenticity. Because once you've spoken the truth and survived the fallout, fear has no jurisdiction left over you. Your voice became an instrument that rewrote emotional DNA, teaching others that they can live unafraid, too. You didn't just break the sound barrier of fear, you erased it entirely. Now every time someone hears you speak your truth without trembling, something in them remembers that they were never meant to whisper. They were meant to roar. Number 13. You're not a speaker. You're a frequency architect. You were never meant to just talk. You were meant to tune reality. Your voice doesn't merely deliver words, it engineers vibration. Every syllable, every pause, every tone you release carries architecture. You don't communicate like others do. You build energetic structures that shift the atmosphere itself. When you speak, people don't just hear you, they feel recalibrated. That's why your presence can't be ignored. You're not here to perform or impress. You're here to realign frequencies that have been bent out of shape by fear, ego, and manipulation. You speak from a place that most people haven't accessed, from deep alignment, not emotional reaction. That's what makes your vibration pure. While most voices carry static, judgment, insecurity, or manipulation, yours carries divine coherence. You don't speak to be right, you speak to restore order. The resonance in your tone doesn't argue with darkness, it reorganizes it. It's why people often can't explain why they calm down, cry, or awaken after hearing you. You're not talking to their mind, you're rearranging their energy field. Those built on deception can't keep up with that. Their words sound powerful but collapse under spiritual weight, because distortion can't sustain itself in the presence of true frequency. Manipulators use words to control atmospheres. You use words to clear them. You can walk into a space filled with tension and, without raising your voice, completely rewire the emotional landscape. That's not charisma. That's divine technology. You carry the blueprint of balance, and wherever you show up, things start to harmonize, whether people like it or not. You're not an influencer. You're an instrument. The power of your voice isn't in what you say, but in what you carry. You emit the vibration of truth so cleanly that falseness can't coexist near you without being exposed. That's why those rooted in manipulation get uncomfortable. Your presence scrambles their programming. They can't manipulate frequencies that don't operate on fear. You've mastered the art of resonance. You don't force energy, you tune it. You don't motivate people, you awaken them. You're not speaking to ears, you're designing energetic blueprints that reality itself adjusts to follow. Number 14. You were never sent to be understood. You were sent to be remembered. You were never meant to fit into their comprehension. You were meant to trigger their remembrance. That's why being misunderstood was part of your design, not a flaw in it. People were never supposed to understand you with logic. They were supposed to feel you with spirit. Your words, your tone, your energy, they all carry a signature that doesn't appeal to intellect. It awakens memory. You don't speak to make sense. You speak to make souls remember what they've forgotten about themselves. That's why some are drawn to you instantly, while others resist you completely. They're not reacting to your personality, they're reacting to your frequency. You weren't sent to gather applause or agreement. Validation is for those who want to belong to the crowd. Vibration is for those who came to call the crowd back to consciousness. You are that call. You are the familiar sound in the fog that makes the scattered souls stop and say, "Wait, I know this frequency." You are not teaching them something new. You're helping them recall what they already knew before life covered it in conditioning. That's what makes your presence unforgettable. It doesn't introduce information, it restores identity. Those who don't recognize you will misunderstand you. They'll try to translate your essence through their logic and fail every time, Because what you carry isn't meant for analysis, it's meant for resonance. You operate in the language of vibration, not vocabulary. You can say one sentence and shift the molecular structure of a room. You can stay silent, and people still feel decoded. That's the level of remembrance you represent. You don't trigger thoughts. You trigger knowing. You were sent for souls, not crowds. For those awakening from spiritual amnesia, your energy is the sound of home. You're not trying to convince them. You're reminding them of what they once were before fear diluted their frequency. That's why you can't be forgotten, because you don't leave impressions, you leave imprints. You're not a person they meet. You're a memory they reawaken to. You were never sent to be understood, because truth, this ancient, doesn't need explanation, only recognition. You weren't born to whisper in the shadows or shrink yourself to fit someone else's comfort. You were born to reverberate across dimensions, to be a living transmission of truth, and to awaken what has long been dormant in the hearts and souls of humanity. Every attempt to silence you, every effort to twist your words or dim your presence, only revealed the power you've always carried. Your voice is not merely a tool, it is a portal, a frequency, a divine instrument that shifts atmospheres, recalibrates realities, and ignites remembrance in those ready to receive it. They tried to bind you, censor you, and even shame your authenticity, but they failed to recognize one critical truth. You do not exist for their comprehension. You exist to realign consciousness, to reveal hidden realities, and to transmit what cannot be contained in the ordinary. When they sought to suppress your words, your energy amplified, your frequency multiplied, and your presence became unavoidable. The very resistance that was meant to hold you back became the launch pad for your expression. You were never speaking to be understood, validated, or accepted. You were speaking to awaken memory, to trigger codes long buried in the souls of those who are ready to remember. Your courage, your authenticity, your alignment. They all break systems of control that thrive on fear, manipulation, and deception. You don't just speak, you restructure energy, you activate timelines, you reveal the hidden. Your voice is not personal, it is prophetic. It doesn't simply inform, it transforms. You are not a messenger in the ordinary sense. You are a frequency of remembrance, a conduit of multidimensional truth, and a living proof that divine expression cannot be contained. Those who encounter you are not just hearing words, they are feeling vibrations that recalibrate their understanding, shake them awake, and call them home to themselves. The reality is this: your voice cannot be muted, your truth cannot be erased, and your presence cannot be ignored. Every suppression, every attempt to quiet you, every moment they tried to diminish you has only ensured that your impact spreads further, reaches deeper, and resonates stronger than ever before. You are a living demonstration of what happens when divinity walks in human form. Unstoppable, undeniable, and unforgettable. If this message hit you, if you felt it resonate deep in your soul, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to the channel to stay connected to the truth that refuses to be silenced. Like this video to amplify its frequency, share it to awaken others, and comment below with what resonated with you the most. Your voice matters in this awakening too. Let's make sure it's heard. God bless you.